These words come from the gospel written by an author whose name was Mark. And these are the words that he has concerning Jesus choosing the 12 disciples. Then Jesus went up a hill and called to himself the men he wanted. They came to him, and he chose 12, whom he named apostles. I have chosen you to stay with me, he told them. I will also send you out to preach, and you will have authority to drive up evilness. These are the 12 he chose. Simon, Jesus gave him the name Peter. James and his brother John, the sons of Zebedee. Jesus gave them the name Sons of Thunder. Then he chose the sons of let's see, here we go. Andrew and Philip, who were also, by the way, brothers. Bartholomew, who was often named Nathaniel. Matthew, Thomas, another James, the son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Patriot, and Judas Iscariot, who became the traitor. These were the 12. Earlier I quoted Charles Hamill, who made reference to the fact that the task to be done is not the call. The call is the call. It is the call that comes from the one who calls on you to do the task. He was the president of Barrington College in Rhode Island and an author, and produced a number of Bible study guides. And he was also, interestingly enough, the ministry's faculty member for the InterVarsity Christian Fellowship in Madison, Wisconsin. He led me to think about Jesus. It's interesting. He led me to think about Jesus and that call. And what has come to me is that the call includes not only the invitation or the announcement that I need you, or I welcome you, or I want you, or you need to be a part of who we are because this is a good cause or a sacred cause. But the important thing is, who is that's being called? And so I wanted to spend some time with you today to take a look at these 12 disciples. I want to repeat who they are. Simon Peter, Andrew, Peter's brother, James and John, named Men of Thunder, Levi, who was called Matthew, identified as the collector of public revenue. It was the Greek word for petition. Thomas, Thaddeus, Simon the Patriot, Philip, Bartholomew, who was often called Nathaniel, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. And I think that's important. Unless there's an error in the translation in the Bibles that I've been looking at, it was assumed that he was not the traitor at the beginning, but he became the one who pointed out Jesus, who eventually then was killed. So you'll note in that list of persons, there are no individuals who have any military importance or value, except perhaps for Simon the Patriot, who was a zealot, a freedom fighter. There were no synagogue teachers. There were no rabbis. There was no one from the pool of lawyers who were often the Pharisees within the temple and the synagogue. And there was not a priest from the temple. These were common, ordinary folk just like us. Just like us. So who did Jesus select according to these four Gospels? The accounts are fairly clear, although they differ in terms of sequence. Interestingly enough, In Mark, Jesus comes to the Sea of Galilee, meets two fishermen, James and John, and invites them to become disciples. It's not the case for the writing of John. He says the second person that was come was not the other disciples, Peter and his brother, but in fact they were Andrew and his brother. So there are differences indeed. Each of them were called by God through Jesus to become fellow followers, journey people with Jesus, and to be proclaiming the good news. James and John were clearly brothers. They were brothers of Zebedee. Zebedee obviously had an important task. He was one who had a business. His sons were working for him. They were fishermen. And you should, if you are aware of the fact that even today, being a fisherman is a dangerous job if it's done professionally. If you're out there in the ocean looking for lobster or salmon or whatever else you're looking for, it is a risky task. It is a task that demands an incredible amount of strength and commitment. It is a task that is filled with risk, enormous risk. You have no idea whether you're going to be able to get on the lake and off the lake without a serious storm. It is a very difficult task. These were two young men who were working for their father, James and John. And they counted on that daily catch that they would have, that indeed they would make enough money to be able to repair their nets, to get new nets, to hire others who would join them, to repair their boat or to buy a new boat. This was a difficult task, but they were invited to come, and they just left everything, their father and the business and their job, and they followed Jesus. Simon, Peter, and Andrew were also brothers, and they appear at least to have their own business. It's very likely they owned the nets and they owned the fishing location. They owned their own boat. And it says, when Jesus called on them, they left their boat and followed Jesus. Now, we don't know whether, like Paul, who was a tent maker, and he plied that trade throughout his ministry, we don't know whether they came back and forth and opened up their business for a short while, went back with Jesus, left for a short while, went back for Jesus. We don't know that, because that surely has not been revealed to us. So Simon and Andrew, Simon, Peter, and Andrew, who was Peter, who was later identified as the Rock, this man of exceptional, inquisitive faith, who Jesus once said, "It is upon you I shall build this movement." Consider also John's gospel that says that Philip and Nathanael, or Bartholomew, were called to serve. We don't know much about either one of them, except that Philip was so enthralled by Jesus. He had been a follower of John the Baptist. He then was seen by Jesus, and Jesus said to him, "Come and follow me, join me." And he left immediately and went to talk to his brother. So that's three brothers who are part of the discipleship group. So he went to Nathanael and Bartholomew, and he said to him, "I have found the one that Moses and the prophets have promised us." And get this, Nathanael says, "What good can possibly come from Nazareth?" Remember, it was Jesus who was pursued by his mother and brothers and sisters because they thought he had lost his mind. They were worried about his well-being. It is also Jesus who said, no one is a prophet even is not honored and recognized in his own town. So it was pretty common knowledge that there were those who believed that Nazareth couldn't produce much of anything. particularly the Messiah. We do know that indeed Philip died a horrible death, as did the other 10 of the disciples. The only one who survived into old age, we believe, was John. And we also believe that it was John who wrote the fourth gospel, and it was John who wrote the Revelation document. He by then was well into his late 90s, a bright and capable and articulate in his writing. He was gifted and remembered so much of the prophetic message that came from the prophets, the Psalms, and a host of others. So when Jesus met Nathanael, or Bartholomew, he said to him, "This is a real Israelite." Now, keep in mind that all of the disciples were of the Jewish faith. They were also all Israelites. They all lived in the same area for the most part. And indeed, what Jesus said about Nathanael was, "There is nothing false about him." The other two people that Jesus called, I immediately put him at odds with both the temple, leadership and authority, as well as the caregivers and caretakers of the Roman Empire. Among them was Simon the Patriot. Now keep in mind that by then, when Jesus began his ministry, probably somewhere around at the age of 30, for 90 some years, Rome had controlled Israel, had controlled all of that territory. And the people who lived there were owned by Rome. They were owned by Rome. So anyone who was a patriot suddenly, no doubt, had a target on their back. Jesus invites this person into discipleship, which I think is fascinating, recognizing that this is one who will surely be observed and watched carefully to see what this new group of people were all about and whether or not he would have some influence over them to contribute to the overthrow of the Roman Empire. In the year 70, 40 years after Jesus began his ministry, in fact, there was a significant rebellion, and the temple in all of Jerusalem was sacked and destroyed. Everything was torn down. Everything was lost. The other person that Jesus invited that I think is rather fascinating is that he invited Levi. Levi is Matthew. Matthew was the collector of public resources. Public resources. This was a person who, like others like him, would go to the Roman counselor or person in charge and say, "I'd like to bid on collecting the stuff that is necessary at the port. So when the ships come in, I can collect from them on your behalf. And or I want to be able to collect the tax that is levied on everyone that lives in the territory who is indeed owned by Rome." And so they would identify what they think they could collect. And if it was the highest bid, they'd get a contract. And the contract was to collect that money. And the belief of those who signed the contract with Rome was that they could collect more. And anything above what they had agreed to do in that contract was theirs. The most hated person next to Rome was this tax collector, or this collector of public revenue, public resources. And so it was Matthew, who Jesus met and said, "Come, follow me," went and had a meal with him in his home. And it was thereafter an accusation that Jesus hung out with tax collectors, prostitutes, and sinners. Jesus might say, that's my kind of person. Because they needed him. They needed him for changing in their lives. They needed him because indeed he would be the one who could help them see a new way of living, a new way of embracing life in a special and powerful way, a new way to direct their lives to doing kindness and good. And it was Matthew who said, if I have cheated anyone, I will repay that person double. So those are the disciples who were called. And the last one who I want to make reference to is Judas. Judas in history has been given the name of the person who denied his belief in Jesus and pointed him out to the authorities so that he could be arrested. It's very clear that Jesus had irritated a fair number of people. He had irritated the rabbis who were teaching. He had irritated the lawyers when he would engage them in conversation and then embarrass them by their foolishness. He was hated by those who were part of the temple, because the temple oftentimes was a place where they were engaged in behavior that was unacceptable as far as Jesus was concerned. You may recall the time he went in, saw them, the money changers and those who were selling the sacrifices. He became exceptionally angry that they were defiling this place of God, overturned the table, and with a whip drove them out of the temple. This was a profitable piece of business for those who were selling those sacrifices, and I'm sure a portion of that was going to the priests and to the temple. And Jesus was a threat in many ways to Rome, because Rome saw his power, saw the appeal, saw the interest that he showed. And then when he comes into Jerusalem, as if he is indeed demonstrating to the Roman authority, but also to the faith of the day, this is the Messiah. I am the one who has come, as was prophesied, on the back of a donkey, peacefully into this land. And there was such energy and excitement and joy in serving Jesus. So Judas was oftentimes seen as the person who was unfaithful from the beginning. And so legend has it that he was the treasurer of the group, and any monies that they had was dedicated for the poor, the hungry, the disadvantaged. And indeed, it is said that he was the one who was taking from the coffers of the disciples. He is also very clearly indicated as the one who was hungry for the resources and wanted, in some respects, to call upon Jesus to declare himself, because he too, I suspect, wanted to see Rome overthrown, and he had witnessed Jesus' authority and his power. You may recall that Judas was also part of the last meal that they had together, the Passover meal, and then that very special service which we all through the course of Christendom have called the Eucharist or the Lord's Supper. That is the one who then Jesus said, one will deny me, one will betray me among you. And interestingly enough, a number of them betrayed Jesus. Peter, this rock upon which the movement would be built because of his solidness. James and John, these men of thunder, who indeed were bold in their pronouncements. Others who said, yes, I will follow you to the death. They turned away from Jesus. So those are the disciples. They are disciples that in many ways, like us, struggle to understand who Jesus is, struggle to understand what Jesus is calling us to do. And rightfully so, as Stephen King says, when you know what you are called to do by God, why don't you do it? That is to say, with God, by God's guidance and assistance, why don't you do it? Interesting coming from Stephen King. Indeed, you are among those invited to participate. Each of us are called to live the life of Christ in the community in which we find ourselves, in the relationships that we have, in the opportunities we have to reach out to others. We all have that opportunity, and we all can be invited to become disciples of Jesus, and then be assured that Jesus will be in us through his Spirit, will be with us, will guide us, will assist us, and will be there to give us energy and power of faith that we might indeed call others to Jesus. There you are. Those are the disciples. God bless you, and God bless them.